A warning from Europe that sounds less like diplomacy and more like a siren. French President Emmanuel Macron has declared that European industry is facing a life or death moment. Europe is squeezed between a hyper-competitive China and a fiercely protectionist America. And Macron says the only way out is not confrontation but cooperation, starting with China. So what is pushing Europe to this breaking point? It begins with a massive trade imbalance. Last year alone, Europe exported 213 billion euros worth of goods to China, but imported a staggering 519 billion euros. That's a 306 billion euros deficit, a gap so wide that Macron says it is simply untenable. His message to Beijing is blunt. You are killing your customers. Why? Because China sells heavily to Europe, but buys very little back. Europe's fear is simple. Its companies cannot survive if China keeps flooding markets with cheaper goods while refusing to open its own markets. And that is not all. Europe's investment in China is also huge, around 232 billion euros, but China's investment in Europe, barely 65 billion euros. Macron says that has to change super fast. French President Macron laid out Europe's dilemma. He said, Europe recognizes China's strength, but he says we cannot be constantly importing. And Europe cannot let Chinese companies dominate strategically important sectors. He wants China to do what European giants like EDF and Airbus did years ago. Invest, build factories, create jobs, share value, not come in with what he calls predatory investments. Deals that build dependency and threaten Europe's industrial backbone. And here is the most dramatic part. Macron says if China does not change course, Europe may be forced to impose custom duties, tariffs similar to what Donald Trump did. Now, France is taking over the G7 presidency on January 1st. Macron wants to use this moment and the global stage to reshape the conversation. A surprising move is on the table. Macron is reportedly considering inviting President Xi Jinping to the G7 summit in France. Why? Because he wants to bring China into the room and not shut it out. And instead of escalating tensions, Macron is offering Beijing a truce, a mutual pullback. Europe would ease restrictions on the export of semiconductor machinery. China would scale back its control over exports of rare earth minerals materials the world desperately needs for electronics and clean energy. A deal, he says, that could prevent an all-out trade war and maybe save Europe's industry from collapse.